Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Canute Rary, and I am a storyteller. About 6 years ago, Elizabeth Ellis came up from Texas, and she came to folk school and had a workshop on storytelling. And I, being retired at the time and wondering what I was going to do next, came to that storytelling workshop. And that day, that week, that Friday, she opened the cage, and I want to say the canary flew out, and I have been working on becoming a better storyteller every time I get up to tell a story. So I want to welcome you this morning to the folk school. It's a great day. I was talking to one gentleman, and he was talking about the name of his town, and I came from a little farm town in Ohio, and just like the t-shirt said, I got here as fast as I could to the mountains, and they were calling my name, and I came. But I was... this little town of Groveport, my family settled in Ohio. Now, it was not Groveport when they settled it. It was a place called Rary's Port, because it was on the Ohio-Erie Canal, and it was a port, and the Rary family settled on one side of it. Matter of fact, spread over to the other side. And then there was another fella who started the town right next to that called Kearns Grove, and they were butting into each other, and these two guys had big egos, including my relative at the time, my old-time cousin. And ultimately, one day when they were out and the town got together and had a meeting, they dropped both the names, and left these fellows out and called it Groveport, Ohio. So it was Groveport, Ohio, and I appreciate that. But my Aunt Arline was the lady that raised me. I was raised on a farm in Ohio, as I said. And my Aunt Arline loved my brothers and I very much because her sister, my mother, passed away. And when she passed away, we went to live on the farm with my Aunt Arline. Now, we were young. I was 6 at the time, and my older brother was 8. My younger brother was 4. And my Aunt Arline wanted to make sure that she did a good job. She'd never been married, and she'd never had any children, but she really loved her sister, and she wanted to do a good job. And so she gave us rules. We had 5 rules to live by. Now, when we were kids, young, when we first moved there, those rules were to keep us out of trouble on the farm, because, there were always things to get into trouble on the farm. But when we were older, then we also had cars and girls to be concerned about, which she was concerned about. So the first rule she had was, if there was any question about possibly it causing trouble, or if we might get in trouble or we might get hurt, the first rule was, just don't do it. My Aunt Arline said, just don't do it. You don't need to do that. And the second rule was, well, don't get hurt. And so we had that rule, don't get hurt. The third rule was, don't get killed. Yeah, she kind of wanted us to live old enough to make sure she could check off that she had done her job. And the fourth rule was, don't hurt anybody else. And the fifth rule was, if you forget all the other rules, remember rule number 1, which is just don't do it. And as I said, we had children. As we grew up, we had girls and cars that got in that list of rules. And as long as you lived in my Aunt Arlene's house, which I did up until the time I was a freshman in college, you followed those rules. And she was pretty sure that you knew those rules because she would repeat them pretty regularly as we came along to tell her what we were going to do next in life. And one day I asked my brother Fred, by the way, the other thing that Fred and I and Ike, my brothers and I, had as our rules were, don't tell Aunt Arline and don't get caught. Those were our rules. So when I was a freshman in college, I was still living at home, and my Aunt Arline was still had the rules that we were working by. So I asked my brother Fred if I could borrow his car to drive to town so I could impress my girlfriend by driving back and forth in front of her house with my brother's car before I went to work. Now, the reason why this might have been impressive for her is my brother he allowed me to borrow his 1963 fastback, silver, highly polished, chrome wheels, 4 on the floor, Corvette Stingray. Yes. He said I could borrow it. He was a gracious man. He still is today. He's a great man. And so I borrowed his car, and I drove to town, and I drove the car back and forth in front of my girlfriend's house. that day. She wasn't on the porch, and I didn't see her in the window, and I'm not sure if she saw me at all that day, but I tried. And I drove it on to work. I worked 3 to 11. I worked in a factory making cabooses. And I went on to work, and I parked it way over in the corner of the parking lot to make sure that if at all possible, nobody would ding it or hurt it. And so I went on to work and I was a welder's helper at the time, and a fellow said to me during that evening, he said, "Look, Canoe, we're going to go out after work, and we're going to go frog gigging." Now, I don't know about you all, but frog gigging I never had done before. But I was a curious young man, and that's a process where you take a real pointy stick and you go out and wade through a marsh in the middle of the night, and you try to stick a small object like a frog as it's moving with a stick. And so we did that till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we did get one frog. Okay. By the time we got back, I also had made another decision, was I was never going to go frog gigging again. And I did not want the one frog we had, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't the one that stuck it anyway. But I got in the car. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was tired, and I was heading for home. And there were 2 ways I could have gone home. The first way would have been straight up the road and down the road, and my lights would have flashed right into my Aunt Arlene's window, and she'd have woken up, and I would know that I would have gotten a repeat of the 5 rules, particularly rule number 1, which is I shouldn't have done it in the first place. And so I thought, well, maybe I would take the long way home. And the long way home was a curvy road and coming in another direction, and the lights wouldn't show in the windows, and I could get home, probably hear the same lecture on the next morning, but at least I wouldn't hear it that night. So I did that. I took the long way home, and I was driving home, and then I woke up. I woke up, and the front of the car was still on the road, and the back of the car was beginning to slide into the ditch. And the Corvette and I were sliding down the road, and pretty suddenly, the edge of the Corvette hit the middle earth there with this front side, and the Corvette and I began to fly. And we rolled over and over and over and over and over until we landed, the Corvette and I, in the middle of the field. Well, as I looked up, I could see the steam coming off the engine where the hood used to be. And I shoved the window out and cut my hand a little bit, but I shoved the window out and crawled up through the front windshield, which because the doors wouldn't open, over the engine where the hood used to be, over the tires where the fenders used to be, and over the front of the car where the bumper used to be, up through the field, out of the ditch, onto the road, and I walked down the road about a half a mile to the house. As I walked in the house, I was pretty sure there's no reason to be too quiet, but I flipped on the lights and let the door slam and walked upstairs to my brother's room, and I woke my brother up and I said, "Fred," I said, "I've wrecked your car. I've wrecked your car, and it's completely totaled." My brother, of course, looked at me and goes, "No, it couldn't be that bad." And I said, "Yes, Fred, I rolled it into Farmer Johnson's field up the road." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, it's completely destroyed." He said, "Well, did you hurt yourself?" I said, "Well, I cut my hand a little bit." And he said, "Well, don't worry about it. Tomorrow morning, let's get up and we'll take care of it. You just go on to bed." So I walked across as if I was going to go on to bed, and I realized there was no use going on to go to bed because sooner or later that door was going to open to the bottom of the stairway, and my Aunt Arline was going to call, "Canute." And so I just turned around and walked downstairs, and my Aunt Arline was there. And we did walk down. As I walked downstairs and stopped, she said, "What happened? What's wrong?" I said, "Well, I wrecked Fred's car, and it's in a field and it's totally destroyed." And she looked at me for a moment, and I said, and she said, "Did you get hurt?" And I said, "Well, I cut my hand a little bit." My Aunt Arline said, "Well, come on in the kitchen." And we walked in the kitchen, and she had me sit down at the kitchen table, and she got out some methylate, and she got out soap and water, and she got out a cloth, and she got out bandages, and then she washed my wound and put the methylate on it and wrapped it up and said, "You go on to bed. We'll talk about this in the morning." Well, my Aunt Arline didn't bring it up in the morning. As a matter of fact, we never talked about it again. It was a surprising day because I had certainly expected that. And I realized at that moment in time just how much my Aunt Arline loved me. And that rule number 3, don't get killed, trumps all the other rules. Yeah.